everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for the Federal Job Search webinar. My name is Dr. Mary Catherine Arnold, and I am the Director of Student Affairs for the online campus. Before we get started, I would just like to remind everyone of a couple of housekeeping items. The first thing is that you will notice that you have all been muted. It's important to note that should you have any questions throughout today's presentation, that you can go ahead and you can type them right into the Q&A box that's either at the top or the bottom of your screen. I will be sure to set some time aside at the conclusion of this presentation to review all the questions and concerns, as well as to try and answer them the best as possible as we go through today's information. I also wanted to remind everyone that this presentation is being recorded. So although I ask that everyone take some notes throughout this presentation, should you happen to miss any of the information, you will each receive or you will each be able to access the copy of the recording through the registration link. In addition, I will be sure to post this on our YouTube channel as well in the upcoming months, so that way you would have it for future access as well. And then tonight's session will require some participation from you as well, so please be ready to answer some questions and provide your feedback as we go throughout the presentation. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in and begin discussing what to expect when job searching for a federal job. So tonight we're going to be covering a variety of topics surrounding the federal job search and the application process that you may come across. We will first start out with reviewing some of the more common myths surrounding federal jobs, and then dive deeper into how the job search for a federal position would most likely differ from what you would typically see in when you're looking for jobs in the private sector. In addition, we'll go over what the general schedule, or more commonly known as what it is, the GS levels. And we'll talk a little bit about those, about how to be prepared for them in your job search and what you should really be looking for, so that way you'll have a good idea as to where you can rank yourself in the GS level when you're trying to find jobs that you are eligible to apply for. We'll also take a look at how to locate federal jobs, and then we'll also talk about building a resume that will be geared towards the federal jobs. And then prior to the questions, we'll also take some time just to review a couple of extra tips to hopefully help you with feeling a little bit more prepared for the next steps in your federal job search. So let's first start off by reviewing some of the most common misconceptions of federal jobs. Prior to this session, I told you that we would have some times that we would require you to participate. So this is one of them. So over the next couple of slides, we'll talk about some of the common myths. I just want to see if you think they're true or false, and we'll go ahead and we'll talk a little bit more about why they might be what they are. So the first myth that we have is that many people think that government jobs are only located in Washington, D.C. Do you think this is true or false? Please take a moment to go ahead and type into the Q&A box on your screen whether you think it's true or false. So it looks like we're a little bit split on that myth. And the truth is that government jobs are actually found across the entire country. So and across the entire world as well. So for those of you who said false, you are absolutely correct. So when we're talking about it, here is a map that you can see to help you visualize how government jobs are spread across the country. This map takes a look at all of the individuals who are over 16 years old and working, and compares it with the percentage of those who are working for government agencies. So as you can see, DC, like Washington, DC, Alaska, and Maryland, tend to have the highest percentage of workers who work for the government. There are also close to 80% of the workforce who are employed in states such as New Mexico, Wyoming, and Mississippi, so all across the country. Now, although you're going to see a decent amount of opportunities in the Washington, D.C. area, that isn't the only place as well. So to put it into perspective, in November 2017, just about a little over, or approximately about 3 years ago, the federal government employed 364,000 people in just that surrounding area. But a lot of these were also anywhere located about even like a 2-hour commuting distance. So they might be thrown into the whole Washington, D.C. Area, but in reality, they're 2 hours away. In 2018, however, the one thing I want to point out too with this myth is that California also had a large number of federal workers, including 149,146. So a very, very high number of people who were employed. And they had pretty much one of the highest, if not the highest, in 2018. And in addition, as of 2018, there were over 89,000 people working in the US government in foreign countries. So again, as we can see, it doesn't matter where you're located in the country. It doesn't matter if you're even outside of the country. There's still possibilities for you to work for the government regardless of where you're located. So let's go ahead and take a look at our next myth. The next myth states that federal salaries are below the private industry. Do we think that this is true or false? Go ahead and type your answer into the Q&A box for me for this one. So it looks like a majority of us are stating that it's true. This is actually false as well. So federal salaries are quite competitive with all markets and industries across the board. According to data from the US Bureau of Economic Analysis in 2018, federal civilian workers made an average wage of $94,463 per year compared to the private sector worker, which was only $63,306 per year. The government determines the pay that you would receive based off of the general schedule, which is known as the GS. Again, we're going to talk about this a little bit more in detail and later on in tonight's presentation, but that's a lot different than what you're going to see from the private sector, which does not have any regulations or practices in place to provide a competitive wage for their professionals. So again, that's why you're going to be seeing a little bit of a difference between what you're seeing in the privatized sector versus what you're seeing in the government as well. The one other thing to consider with the GS scale, though, is that the pay will also vary by your geographic areas. So even though this statistic on the screen is, is an accurate statistic and is comparative, it's not taking into account where if you're in more of a rural area, you're probably making a little bit less than someone who's in an expensive city, like if you were in somewhere in California, where you would probably be expected to make a little bit more just because the cost of living is more expensive there, or someone who's in New York City, cost of living there is more expensive. So the government does also take that into account with the GS pay scale as well. The government will not hire any jobs that are in my career plan / field of study. Do we think that this one is true or false? So I'm seeing a lot of false. That's absolutely right. So on your screen, you're actually going to see a graph that's going to show you the distribution of types of jobs that currently exist in the federal sector. The aqua color on your screen demonstrates all of your white collar positions. The blue demonstrates your blue collar positions. And then the gray that's in this graph demonstrates your miscellaneous positions. At 300,000, we see administration, and a little of 290,000, we see medical and health. There's also a plenty with engineering, finance, legal, business, technology, and more. So a lot of the programs that you're going to see here at South College, this is something that you could expect to find a position in your field of study. You will also find in your search that there are thousands of job titles that require diverse backgrounds, education, work experience, and other various types of expertise. So it's not just what you're seeing on this graph. This was just the easiest way to kind of put all those numbers into one place for you. Now, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics in September 2020, workers are currently employed in over 800 occupations across 400 industries. So again, we're talking about a really wide variety of types of positions and fields that you can look at. Available positions include anything from like your STEM career, so your science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, to business and accounting, to operations, to law enforcement, to attorneys, to administrative assistants, to computer and information technology, the program managers, social workers, health workers, and just so much more. The list is just, it goes on and on. So everything that you can pretty much expect to find in the privatized sector, you'd be able to expect to find in some form or fashion in one of the agencies in the federal government. And the federal government, just to kind of even put it into more of a perspective for you, the federal government is currently the nation's largest employer with over 2.1 million civilian employees. So again, they hire a lot of people across all different industries because every sector and every agency is going to have different functionalities and different positions that they would need to fill. So our next myth is that it takes a couple months to get hired. Do we think this is true or false? So I'm seeing a lot of true. So I will say it's almost like this one's almost like a trick question. It's a little bit of both. So the federal government has a target of 45 days to hire, but even though that's the target date, it can take much longer and even up to or even exceeding 6 months. So to best plan for the length of each job search, also be sure to check out the closing date of each of the job and the job postings. Each job will have its own closing date. So if you're looking for the closing date, that's going to help you to be able to plan for how long could this process with applying to this specific job, how long could this possibly take? You also want to be patient with the process as once again, once you apply, your application goes through a variety of different steps. You'll typically see your application is going to go through a scanning process, including either a technology system like an applicant tracking system or a recruiter or an agency. Once that agency or software scans your application and other pieces of the application and other individuals' applications, it provides a list of qualified candidates to the recruiter and or hiring manager who will then select individuals for an interview. The agencies will then also conduct interviews and select the best candidate from that. And then after you go through all of that and all that timely process, typically you would have to go through and undergo some background check, a security clearance, medical exams, drug testing. Again, that's going to be dependent on what that specific job is. But that is why it can take a little bit longer for the federal government to bring you in because there tends to be a lot more clearances. Now, this next one, the next myth is you must be a U.S. citizen to apply for a federal job. Do we think that this one is true or false? So I'm seeing a lot of true. The answer is it is a little bit of both, but in general, you must be a U.S. citizen or national, meaning residents of American Samoa or the Swains Island. And you must work for the federal government. So, however, there are some exceptions to this general rule. It is rare. So in some rare cases, a federal agency may hire a non-US citizen into the expected service or senior executive service if the annual Appropriations Act, the immigration law, and the agency's internal policies allow it. So you have 3 extra layers that also need to approve of, if you're not a US citizen, of you being hired for this type of role. In addition, the federal agency may also request approval to hire a non-US citizen into the competitive service if no qualified US citizen is available. So what this means is it is not an immediate no to a position if you aren't a US citizen. However, it's most likely a no. So if you are wondering if the position is open to a US citizen, the best piece of advice I can give you is the job announcement will always list who may apply. And that will tell you if a non-US citizen is eligible for this position. Again, they typically tend to be at very high level positions, a lot of positions that are very rare or hard to come by. But that could be something that you could look at. And we have a couple more myths. So this next one is someone with a criminal record will not be able to work for the government. Do we think that this one is true or false? So it's looking like a lot of us are thinking it's a true statement. This was kind of a trick one. It's actually false. So although there are some exceptions where the position or where someone with a criminal background would not be eligible for that specific position, the vast majority of jobs are available to those with criminal records. Keep in mind that during the hiring process, however, federal agencies are generally going to be requiring candidates and going to consider candidates to go through some type of background check. So depending on what type of job you're looking for and what the clearance level is of that job, those who might have a criminal background might not be eligible for that position. The next one that we have is you only are considered for the position if you know someone who works in the government. Do we think that this one is true or false? And it's looking like we're saying false. So I will say that although I would agree, generally speaking, it is false, it does have a small bit of truth to it. But it is generally going to be considered false a majority of the time. The fact of the matter with the federal government is that if you are qualified for a federal position and you can write a competitive federal resume, you have just as good of a chance as anyone else to be considered for that position. Although knowing someone in any industry, whether it is a job for the federal government or not, although it's going to help you, I feel like the government's vetting process is more based on the skills than what you're even going to see in the privatized sector. So it's almost better if you don't happen to have a network or you're not utilizing a network, you're almost more likely to be successful with looking for a job in the federal government versus the privatized sector. With that being said, however, you do want to make sure that you add all the knowledge, all the skills, and all of the accomplishments that would be applicable to that job on your resume, so that way you can show that you are one of the most qualified individuals for that position. And then you also want to make sure that you can answer all the supplemental application questions, giving yourself that best credit possible and that best chance possible. And then this next one is our last myth. You must possess a security clearance in order to qualify for a federal job. Do we think that this one is true or false? And it does look like we nailed that one. So not all jobs are required. Not all jobs require a federal clearance. So just as we mentioned with the U.S. citizen myth, you can find information as to whether it requires one or not in the job announcement prior to applying. The one thing to keep in mind, however, though, is that all federal positions require the candidate to undergo what is called a suitability adjudication process to determine if the individual is suitable for federal employment. So this means that in addition to meeting all of the other qualifications of the job announcement, an individual will be determined either likely or not likely to carry out the duties of the position with appropriate integrity, efficiency, and effectiveness based off of that adjudication process. So, it is something that, if it's something that you do need a clearance for, they will work with you to get it. But they'll also consider your entire past and background as well. So I hope that you guys enjoyed learning a little bit more about some of the myths. But in addition to the visual aids of how government jobs are spread across the country and various occupations that we saw with that pretty graph with the different colored aquas and blues on it, I did also want to give you a little bit more information as far as that number distribution goes. So here you're going to be able to see the numbers and the distribution of government employees by agency over the last 2 to 3 years with this chart. So although I mentioned earlier that there was 2.1 million employees working for the federal government in 2019, look at the estimate for 2020. It states that they anticipated that throughout 2020, it was going to be 2.2 million. So that means over the last 2 years, the government positions available to individuals have grown. And that's a trend that you see on this chart here. Now, I don't have the accurate numbers because I know things have kind of shifted with COVID, but that is still something to keep in mind that, especially when life gets back to normal, that could be something that we could potentially expect. Now, in addition, when looking at this, You will also see that the chart splits the information into what we consider civilian and uniformed military. So I might mention this a couple of times throughout today's presentation, so I do just want to give you a background of what that is in case you're not aware of the difference. A federal civilian employee is a civilian who works directly for the government. This differs from a uniformed members of the military because although the large majority of uniformed military members are considered citizens of the United States, they are considered employed by the government, but not a civilian. So Army, Navy, any of my branches of military, you're going to be those uniformed military members. Now, the information that you're seeing on your screen right now is just is accurate as of 2017 and was provided by the Office of Personnel Management. This information, I just wanted to give you an idea of where are some of those agencies that you could be looking for a job in, what are some of those most popular agencies that you could go look for. And this information shows some of the various federal agencies that you can go and work for and the number of individuals that they employ. So you can see that the Department of Veterans Affairs is the largest of all of the federal agencies, that they employ the most individuals. Again, this is a combination between both your uniformed military and your civilian. But as you can see, there's tons and tons and tons of individuals who are working for any of these at any point in time. This is only a snapshot. There are tons more federal agencies out there as well that you can work for. I just don't want to bombard you with a bunch of statistics and a bunch of information if that stuff isn't what really gets you going. But this can be really great information for you to review, especially if you're not really sure what agencies are considered federal government agencies, which ones kind of fall into that federal umbrella. So I would say if you're really concerned or you're looking at more information, that you can always go check some more of that information out on your own. So now that you know some of the agencies that you can view for possible job openings, I did want to dive into discussing the GS schedule more in detail. So the GS schedule is the predominant pay scale for federal employees, especially employees in professional, technical, administrative, or clerical positions. The system consists of what we call 15 grades. So it may help you when we're trying to talk through the GS schedule. It may help you to think of the grades similar to your experiences in grade school. Rather than going to 12th grade, you're going to 15th. So your GS1s are going to be your lowest and your GS15s are going to be your highest. It is important to note, though, that you also have steps within each grade. So these steps are built so that you gradually work your way up the ladder and into the higher levels and the higher level GS levels. GS levels can be determined by your education, your experience, and or even like a combination of both. So it's really it's challenging at first to tell you exactly where you're going to land in the GS level. But this chart does a pretty decent job of trying to kind of compare it with and pair both of those factors together so that way you can understand what levels you'd be looking at based off of whatever education level you currently have and whatever education level you'll be finishing in the future. So for instance, your GS1s, those are the individuals who don't have a high school diploma and lack any experience. You can continue to grow in the role and advance one step at a time to gain more experience. If you get a promotion to a higher pay grade, you get to keep your current step and will continue to accumulate weeks of experience throughout that entire step until you would reach that next level. The major difference between your GS1s and your GS2s are that you would possess a high school diploma. So GS2s are very similar to your GS1s because it does not require pretty much any type of experience at all, and it's considered extremely entry level. And then your GS3s will continue to require you to have either more education or more experience. So once you have at least 1 year of experience at the GS2 level or the equivalent, which is what you would typically see with like a 1 year full-time study after high school, you can typically start looking into making that promotional jump from a GS2 into a GS3. It's not definite, it's not guaranteed, but those are things that you can work through your different steps in your grades and then advance on at some point in time. Now, after the GS3 level is where you will begin to find more of your qualifications. So your GS4 will require an associate's degree or a specific number of credit hours at a post-secondary institution. So that means that even if you're not finished with your degree at South College, but you see something that's going to be considered that GS4 level, and you've already gone through maybe like a year, almost 2 years of school, but you don't have your degree yet with us, that could be something where you might be qualified and eligible for that GS4 level. And you can either advance to this level by possessing at least 1 year of experience at the GS3 level, or with working and continuing through your education to learn more. Similar pattern you're going to see throughout the entire GS schedule and the rankings. I don't want to spend a ton of time on every single, category and every single GS level, just because I feel like we would be here all night long. But some positions might vary with the GS level depending on their descriptions. So for instance, at a GS5 and a GS6 level, you may only be expected to have an associate's degree for some positions, where others may want to see continued credits or continued education and or even a bachelor's degree. Generally speaking, your GS7s will require a bachelor's degree or equivalent, but some may also want to see additional experience in it as well. And typically, if they want to see additional experience, it can either be in the form of continued education or previous work experience too. Your GS9s are very similar to your GS7s, where you may fall in the middle depending on the position. Some of these may require and may want a bachelor's degree in experience, where others may want a master's degree. And the same is considered for your GS12 as well. And the other thing that I wanted to just note, however, is once you get into the GS14 and GS15 levels, these are extremely high level positions. Typically, these would require more than a terminal degree, which is like a doctorate, and they'd want to see a high level of executive experience. So I wouldn't even qualify for this, even though I have my doctorate. And although the GS schedule and the GS scale and the qualifying factors don't tend to change from year over year, the pay typically does. So remember when I told you, and the one myth was that, well, the government doesn't really pay, and that was false. The thing that you can typically expect, and it doesn't happen every year, but generally speaking, they always try to give some type of cost adjustment, whether it's the adjustment to the cost of living for their employees or not. So here's the GS pay for 2020. The rates rose from 2019 by a total of 2.6. As we mentioned, there are 10 steps in each pay grade. So generally speaking, it will take an average of 18 years to advance through all 10 steps at that GS level. Now, although you can cap out at a certain pay or a certain step, it does give you the ability to continue to grow and learn and to increase your chances of applying for jobs at the next level and earning more, as you heard about earlier. So what I mean when I say that is, let's say hypothetically I got to step 10, and I feel like I've gotten as far as I can. Well, they might bump me up to the next grade, or they might say, well, if you go ahead and you start your education, we'll bump you up to that next grade. So it's a lot. It can vary from person to person, individual, based off the experience, but you can expect that it will take a while to move from one GS level to the next unless you continue on with your education. When looking at this chart, I do also want to remind you, though, that the pays may be slightly different from what you are seeing on here, depending on where you live and you work. So again, the GS pay is also adjusted to remain comparable with various locations, depending on factors such as the cost of living. Now, although the GS scale is by far the most common pay schedule that you're going to see in the federal job search, there are a couple of agencies and positions that use alternative pay schedules. These are most common with agencies such as the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, so NASA, the Environmental Protection Agency, so EPA, and the Internal Revenue Service, so the IRS. Here are some examples of some alternative pay schedules that you might find. So this first one is the federal wage system. This is a pay plan for many of the blue collar workers and individuals who are not paid by the hour, or I'm sorry, who are paid by the hour. It helps to ensure that salaries for wage laborers align with those of similar positions in the private sector. The Foreign Service is another pay plan. It's similar to the GS schedule where you're going to find 9 pay grades. So rather than 15, you're finding 9. The other difference with this is rather than the GS schedule where you see them listed from FSO1 through FSO9, the FSO1 in the Foreign Service pay schedule is actually the highest level. And then you're also going to see how we saw with the GS schedule that there were 10 grades, or I'm sorry, there were 10 steps in each grade. There's 14 steps in each grade with the with the Foreign Service pay schedule. And then you have your Senior Executive Service. This uses a gradeless pay system. So salary is based on individual performance. Basic pay typically ranges, and again, these are just general numbers. It does change year to year, but typical pay can range from 120,000 to 165,000. Locality pay is not available for those on the Senior Executive Service pay schedule. But again, these are your very, very high levels. These would be what we would have considered for people who were in positions of like that GS14, GS15. So it's that type of equivalent, but in certain organizations, in certain agencies. You'll also see just a handful of other agencies such as your U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Reserve System, and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation that have their own unique plans that vary from any of the GS or the ones that were just aforementioned. So let's go ahead and kind of shift gears and talk a little bit about how do we locate those federal jobs. So the first thing that I would tell you that you would want to do is visit usajobs.gov or OPM, so the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, or call the automated telephone system. What's great about especially usajobs.gov is that you go onto this website, you can view tutorials on these websites. They're going to cover some additional information on how to apply for federal jobs, how to look for federal jobs, and how to get started. The offline alternative to applying online is by calling USA Jobs automated telephone system at 703-724-1850. This has the same openings as online. They are available 24 hours a day. The openings are available 24 hours a day, and customer service representatives are available weekdays from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I will say it's going to be more convenient for you to use online, so try to use the telephone services as the last resort if possible. Some other sources that you see on your list, I wanted to make sure that we were just kind of going through all of these. Federal employers often supplement USA Jobs postings and advertisements in newspapers and journals and even on privatized job boards. So privatized job boards being like your Indeed.com, your Glassdoor.com. Many agencies also rely on job fairs to recruit their workers. So there is a chance for you to speak directly to a recruiter if you can attend one of those job fairs. Right now, it's kind of tough because job fairs aren't happening due to COVID. But that is something to kind of think about for the future, where you could leave your resume in the hands of someone who can review it and hopefully help you to begin that traditional hiring process. So back to that myth where we said, it can be really helpful, just as in the privatized sector, if you get that chance to meet someone and to get that great first impression. It's the same type of concept with the federal job search as well. You may also find it helpful to include places such as your Indeed.com, like I mentioned earlier, for your search as well. Because although this resource requires you to have more familiarization with which resources and organizations are federal agencies, you still would be surprised on the number of relevant job postings that you might find that are a part of one of those federal agencies. Then to help you with locating your federal jobs, make sure you create an account on usajobs.gov. This will help you to keep track of the positions that you apply for, where they are in the hiring process, and when the job closes. And in order to create your account, you would go ahead, click on the Create Account button in the tab on the top right corner of any page of the usajobs.com, or I'm sorry, usajobs.gov site. When you do this, you would have to just use a valid email address and create a username. Agree to the terms of service, and then click the confirmation link, and that is within the email that you would receive afterwards. Activate your account, And then just go ahead and complete the form by providing some brief personal information, then create your password that meets the security criteria. You will also see some security questions. So these are for if you happen to forget your username and password. I'm a very forgetful person. I would always do these types of things whenever I would go in and search for students. So it can be really helpful, make sure that you create some questions and security questions that you're not going to forget the answers to. And then just make sure that when you're going and you're completing this, that you are checking the box that states, I have read and understand the security tips. And then click the button to agree to these terms of use and complete your profile by including your contact information, hiring eligibility, employment preferences, which are, are you looking for full-time, part-time, what geographic areas are you looking for, and your basic account information. You also want to make sure that you build your resume on usajobs.gov, which is really helpful for you throughout this process because you can create and store up to 5 different resumes in usajobs.gov. We're going to be discussing just briefly how to build a federal resume so that you can see how it also differs from one in the non-federal job and in the privatized sector job search. But you do want to try and create it in this platform if possible because it's going to allow you to easily edit, it's going to store it, and it's going to make sure that it's in the exact format that they want it. You can also customize your resume for each job through this website, which is really helpful. And that's also something that you want to make sure that you're doing as well. And then this will help you to organize your resume so that the most important information per that job posting is listed first. So again, it's automatically going to create it the way you need it to be. You also want to take some time after you've created your account to create some search agents. So what a search agent is this is just going to allow you to get notifications on new job postings and jobs emailed directly to you so that you don't always have to be worried about checking that website every day. This tool also lets you save up to 10 job searches so that you don't have to repeat them every time that you visit the site. And then when we're trying to locate jobs as well, you want to make sure that we are applying early and for a variety of positions. So we did talk about this earlier. Government jobs do at times take a while to get through. You want to try to apply early when the jobs are first posted. You also want to apply to a variety of positions so that you do not limit your options. Even though you may have a background in something different, your background might be transferable into other various areas. And what this is going to do for you as a job seeker, it's just going to increase your chances of obtaining an interview. So how do we actually go through and apply for the jobs? So first off, like I said before, we're going to visit usajobs.gov. Select U.S. citizens if you are a U.S. citizen or who currently does not work for the federal government, or select federal employees if you currently work for the federal government. Search for vacancy announcements by keywords that might describe the positions that you want. So these can be things such as a job title, an occupational series, specific technical terms, even by your major. Make sure that you're filtering your results based on your preferences. So some things that you might want to consider when we're talking about preferences, consider things like the specific agency that you're interested in working for, the location of the job, the salary of that job. This is also where you can create automated job searches and set them to come to you daily, weekly, or even monthly. Select the vacancy announcements that interest you to the most, and then just start reviewing those details, and we'll start with the application process itself. So the next step after you've found and located your federal jobs is that we want to start decoding the vacancy announcement. So there are 5 different sections represented by different tabs. Once you have selected the specific position of interest, the overview, duties, qualifications, and evaluations, and then the benefits and other info, and then your how to apply. Those are your 5 different sections. The overview, this provides you with the most important information, such as the salary range, the promotion potential, and the location of the position. The salary range will indicate to you the lowest and the highest salary of that position. If you are an entry-level applicant, you will most likely start at the low end of this range. The open period is going to be on this piece of decoding that vacancy announcement as well. So the open period is, they're the dates for which the applications could be accepted. So that's the only dates that they're looking at accepting applications. If it states continuous as for the open period, what that means is that it means that the position will stay open and they'll keep on getting applicants and in until the candidate pool is filled, or they'll keep on allowing candidates to submit their resume for future vacancies as well. Not all jobs will list this, but that is something that you might find helpful, especially if it's a position that you're really interested in. The series and grade. So this will be covered both by the grade level that we discussed earlier, as well as the occupational series, the number of that groups similar positions together. So that's what the occupational series is. The position information will also be on this section. This is where you will find your work schedule. So we're talking about work schedule being full-time opening, part-time, seasonal, etc. You'll also see that promotion or promotion potential, which indicates the highest level for the position, and will show you that this agency may promote up to this level if a worker meets the requirements to advance. Duty location. So this section states how many openings are available and where they're located geographically. My biggest suggestion to you is that if you see one that's open in your city and you see one that's open into another city, if you can or you are willing to relocate, you definitely want to make sure that you are aware of these other openings, because I can tell you I've personally had many connections who have done this in the past where maybe they didn't get their first opening that they were most interested in, but they did get a second one and that got their foot in the door. And then after a year of service, they were able to move to a location that they actually wanted to be in. It's not the most ideal thing, but sometimes we have to do what we have to do in order to reach our end goal. It also will state the who may apply. So I talked about this earlier. So almost all federal jobs will require that U.S. citizenship. So that's pretty much going to be a standard. That's where you would find that information if you were unsure. It will talk about the security clearance. So what types of clearances you might need to obtain and what background checks you're going to have to go through. It'll also state the supervisory status. So what that means is whether the position involves you having to manage others or oversee someone else. It will also have that job summary, which will provide you with an overview of the hiring agency or that specific office and the position's role within it. So it's that quote unquote job description that we typically see in that privatized sector. And then we'll also see the how to apply. So who do you contact for help and what to expect after you submit your application. Now to apply for it, just like the privatized sector, you're going to submit that resume. Makes it nice and easy, something that we're used to doing on a regular basis. But then it might also require you to develop any additional required materials and submit those as well. Very rare when you see this, but if it does require anything, you might also have a cover letter or something else that you should already have on hand with your privatized sector as well. And then you would go through the interview and then accept the job offer. So those would be the steps that you can expect to understand how to apply and where to apply for that position. So despite that there are many different processes and expectations in the privatized sector of the job searching compared to the federal sector, the general hiring process that you're going to find is pretty similar. So just like the privatized sector, you're going to submit your application. Be sure to submit your application and any other materials that may be necessary. If you don't do it, you're automatically not going to be considered for the position. You would then go through what they call as an evaluation. So the hiring official will then review the applications to find the best qualified candidate. Once your application has been evaluated, you may be selected to move on to the next steps, but you may also not be. If no candidates appear to be qualified, the agency may just close out the process and repost the vacancy announcement. So that is something to keep an eye out for, because if they think that you're not qualified for it and they close it out because they didn't have any qualified candidates and you're really interested in it, when you see that posting reopen, it's going to reopen with like a new number. And at that point in time, you could reapply for the position. Make sure though that you're trying to tweak what you did to learn kind of from your mistakes, as I like to say, so that way you'll be prepared for it. After the evaluation, the hiring officials will conduct interviews of candidates who they feel are the best qualified. Sometimes there is a preliminary telephone interview where other times they might just go straight for the face-to-face. It is not unheard of for agencies to also do telephone or video interviews. So you want to become prepared and feel confident, especially with video interviews, especially right now during COVID. If you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, we do have a great resource. It's called Optimal Resume. Inside of Optimal Resume, you can practice video interviewing, and you can even send it directly to your career services representative for additional feedback. Now, if you are selected for an interview, you will want to treat it exactly the same way that you would treat any other interview. So what does that mean? Practice questions in advance. Try setting up a mock interview with your career services representative to help you with this. Answer questions professionally. Be prepared to ask questions about the organization and the culture. And then gather the contact information of the hiring manager to make sure that you're sending a follow-up thank you note once the interview has ended. Now, once you go through the interview process, the hiring managers will then choose the best candidate for the position after the interviews. Human resources representatives will typically be the contact person and will typically contact the chosen candidate or candidates with the job offer, contingent on completing any remaining requirements. So, what does that mean? This could be gaining additional security clearances or finishing any additional background checks. You may also want to negotiate a salary when the position is offered to you. Just be aware that negotiating pay is not as common in the federal work as it is in the privatized sector because pay ranges are typically set by law or by policy. So agencies do have some flexibility. So again, that's where you would want to become familiar with the GS schedule, see where you land in the GS schedule, and maybe go for a different step in it. So that's always something to be prepared for when the position is offered for you. And if the candidate rejects the job, it is offered to the next highest ranking candidate, and so on and so forth until the job vacancy is filled or the agency decides to close out that process and start all over again. But let's go ahead and just jump into building a federal resume. So federal resumes are often longer than your privatized sector. So you're going to be looking at anywhere between 2 to 4 pages as a standard federal resume length. They will include more information in detail, not only in what you did at the position, but also about the organization. So the organization's address, your salary at that position, and even ask for the contact information of your hiring manager and if they can contact you and contact them. Just as with the privatized sector resume, you must include your contact information. This will include more information, so it will include your full name, your full address, your telephone number, and your email address. I know a lot of people are scared about identity theft and just like their own security with putting their full address on their resume. It is becoming less popular in the privatized sector to include your entire address, but in the federal resume process, you will need to include that. The one thing that you're also going to see that's going to differ from the privatized sector is because you will also be asked to provide your social security number as well as your country of citizenship. So do not include that on a privatized sector resume, but definitely be sure to include it on a federal job. And if you're also willing or interested in taking a job that would require relocation, you would also need to add that information on your resume as well, including where specifically you're willing to relocate to. You'll also see some job facts on your resume. So this is an additional section that's going to differ from your private sector resumes. You will need to include information about the position that you are applying for. Include the announcement number, the position title, and the grade level from the vacancy announcement. In the event that it gives you a range of grade levels for the vacancy, you would want to choose the lowest level that you would accept for this position. So not the lowest one that you think that they're going to give it to you for, but at least the lowest one that you would be willing to accept for this position. Now, this next section is very similar to what you experience in the privatized sector and on any resume that you would use in the privatized sector for your work experience. To format this section, you would want to include the job title of the position, the start and end date of the position, as well as the organization's name, the employer's full address, and the contact information for that employer and also your supervisor. You also want to include the number of hours that you worked per week or state full-time, part-time, seasonal, whatever that job category was. It also is mandatory for you to include the salary that you had while working there or the wage earned, as well as I said before, your supervisor's information, including his or her name, phone number, address, as well as whether you are comfortable with him or her being contacted. After this, you will also want to rewrite your major duties and accomplishments. So you would want to mention any volunteer experience that you may have in this section and format it in the exact same way as your professional experiences. And even if you're self-employed, you would still list it in your employment section as well. For that, you could just write as the employer's name, you could just list yourself. You could just list self-employed, and that would be acceptable. Also, be sure though with work experience section on your resume to include the vacancy announcement and emphasize the parts of your work history that match the qualifications listed on it. And if you've worked in a position where it is complicated to explain all that you've accomplished, consider dividing your duties into sections, such as one for management, one for staff training, and one for budgeting, one for marketing. Whatever it may be, feel free to kind of do some subsectors underneath that. And then you would also see your education. It is going to be similar to your privatized sector, where we're going to include the name and address of the school that you've gone to when the degree was conferred. The one thing that's going to differ is that you would include all of your education, even if you didn't have a degree that was conferred, all the way back through your high school. We would never put a high school on a privatized sector resume, but you would want to include high schools and all the colleges, whether you've received a degree or not, on your resume for a federal job search. Some applications may also want you to provide the number of credits that you've earned. So it could be helpful if you've completed 24 or more credits in a subject related to that position, because 24 credits in a subject is often considered to be the equivalent to a major. So if you're able to kind of put that information on your resume, you're kind of getting some brownie points with the federal government in that job search, and that's going to help kind of distinguish what level in that. So what step are you in that GS level? You also, in your education, would want to list specific courses as well that relate to the job and that might even be mentioned in the job announcement, as well as some agencies may also ask you to provide your GPA. So if they do, just be prepared to do so. And then this next section is other qualifications and awards. You want to make sure that you're mentioning any computer skills, knowledge of a foreign language, or professional designations. These should be skills and achievements that are not immediately obvious or mentioned earlier in your resume. Performance awards could also be listed in this section, or it could be on its own section to show any bonuses or awards that you've received based on your performance at work. And then the last thing that you're going to see that you're going to want to include in your federal resume is your references. You want to be sure to include your references on your resume with not only the name of the person, their employer as well, their job title, their phone number, and their email. Again, whenever you use references in any process, you want to make sure that you have gotten their okay and their approval to use it prior to putting them on your application. And try to just pick 2 to 3 references. And then some other general tips when we're talking about building a resume. These are, you want to make sure you're utilizing the resume builders that are out there in these agencies and on these agencies' websites, because these are the easiest ways to complete the online application for the federal government, because they automatically order your information into the proper format and prioritize your information for you. So you don't need to worry about, well, what do I think this job really wants to see first? Do they want to see my education first? Do they want to see my experience first? You don't have to worry about it. What I would say when you're utilizing these resume builders, just have your resume built in a Microsoft Word document first, so that way you can just copy and paste into these builders, in these agencies builders. And then in addition, make sure that you're looking for some keywords and key phrases. So just as a lot of recruiters in the privatized sector will search for keywords and key phrases on your resume, this is also going to happen in your federal job search as well. Agencies with their own resume builders often use automated systems to check the applicant's qualifications first. So again, if you're building it right through that resume builder, you're doing yourself a favor. And then they will also search for, you'll tend to see that the more keywords the computer finds on an applicant's resume, the higher the applicant's score, which helps make them higher and more likely to be considered for that position. So before we just kind of wrap up, I just want to throw a general a general example of a federal resume for you so you can see what it would look like. The sample here is only one page, so that way you can see the overall composition of it and the variety of some of the different sections that you would include on your federal resume. I mean, again, note some of the differences that we discussed earlier. Things like your top section is all about your availability, the areas that you are looking for jobs, and the types that you are looking for. Once you get further down, you're then going to see that you'll get past you're going to go and dive more in detail about your past experiences. And then, just as I mentioned before, the employment names will include more detail than what you would typically include for the private sector, and you'll see that with like it saying, well, include this organization's name, include this organization's street address. So these are all an overview of what you can expect with your federal resume. So just a couple of extra tips that we want to keep in mind when we're building our resume. So the first off, you want to remember to customize your resume. Make sure that your resume is written for that desired position. Just as you would do with the resume in the privatized sector, it is important to remember that you take the time to do this each and every time. Try to include a cover letter as well. So cover letters help you to stand out from the rest of the candidates. This will also show your professionalism, explain your interest in the job, and match your qualifications to the employer's needs. Just like your resume, you want to make sure that this one is tailored to that specific position as well. What's also helpful about cover letters is that they help to show that you are able to communicate in writing, that you are a strong writer, so that you know how to manage your grammar, your spelling, and those general pieces. You also want to be prepared to have some transcripts available or on hand. And the reason why I say this is that some jobs will ask for your transcripts if you are still in school, or if you are going for a position that's through an internship program that they might have. You most likely will need a copy of your official transcripts as well at the end, especially if this is the case if you're going through and doing an internship with the federal government. In order to do so, I will say that you would just want to log on to, we go through a third-party agency called Parchment. So you would want to order your transcripts through Parchment, but you do need to make sure that your account is in good financial standing with us in order to have access to your official transcripts. And then you also want to make sure that you are just being patient. You will not hear back immediately, but the best thing that I can tell you is be sure to keep track of the jobs that you've applied to and when they close, because this is going to allow you to follow up in an appropriate amount of time. You may also want to create what's called a job tracker, which is just a spreadsheet so that you can keep track of all the positions that you've applied to. So that way you know when you hear back from them. If the position and the job posting has been closed and they are no longer accepting applications, this could be a great chance for you to follow up with that recruiter or that agency to find out what stages they are in the hiring process and gather some feedback from them in the meantime, especially if you weren't considered to advance on. It's always nice to get some feedback to learn what you can be doing differently for similar types of positions. And through tonight's presentation, you heard a lot about some of these other resources that you can look into, but Usajobs.gov is a great resource for you to look into. This is probably the number one resource that I would ever, tell anyone to look at for a federal job searching, just because you're going to be able to find openings for all types of positions, including volunteering opportunities, internships, and jobs at all levels. What I do love about this resource is that you can also create your resume directly through it, and it's going to save it through your profile, so it makes it easy for you to access. It also does have and provides you with instructions on how to navigate through the resource through the how-to option. So it makes it very easy for you to navigate. Careersandgovernment.com is another great resource for you to help locate positions as well. It does provide information about hiring policy changes, resume postings, email alerts, and other invaluable resources. You might also find it helpful to look at careeronestop.org. This is a website that's sponsored by the U.S. Department of Labor. It includes resources such as Veterans Job Matcher, job banks, and resources for military and veterans as well. It can be also a great resource if you're just kind of looking and getting into the career exploration. And then the final resource that I wanted to talk about is just make sure that you're utilizing the Career Services Department and your Career Services representative, because we are all here to help you and we want you to feel confident with everything moving forward through the next processes. So Hopefully you now have a thorough understanding of creating a federal resume. I would say be sure to not only utilize the information that was presented to you in tonight's presentation, but to also reach out to, again, your career services representative for more information. You may also find it helpful to review the career services workbook that is located in your library under the career resources option in the research guides tab. So before I do close out tonight's presentation, I would just like to open it up for any additional questions that you might have. So it looks like one of the questions is, should I edit my resume for every job that I apply to on a in the federal government? Absolutely. Again, the more keywords and key phrases that you're able to include on your resume, the better and the more likely you are going to be with securing that position or at least getting an interview for it. Is it true that when I apply for a federal job that I may not hear back for a long time? Hopefully you've heard this time and time again in tonight's presentation, but it is something that it might take a while. Again, they have the target date of 45 days, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be 45 days. I can tell you when my last connection was hired to the FDA, it took him 6 months before he got the offer, and then it took another 2 months before he was able to relocate to the position where he was at. So it can take a while, but being persistent, being vigilant, definitely making sure that you're following up, that's going to be key, and just staying organized throughout it all. All right, well, it doesn't look like I have any additional questions. So I do want to thank you all for attending today's session. I hope that you found the information beneficial. Should you run into any additional questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to let me know. I have provided my contact information on this slide for you, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have. You can also respond to any of the email reminders about tonight's presentation, as those will come directly towards me, and I can go ahead and answer your questions through there as well. The last thing I just wanted to say is that we do have a brief survey for you to complete at the conclusion of this presentation. If you can just complete it, it would be really great and helpful for us, because it lets us know what additional types of trainings and seminars you'd like to see, so that way we can continue to benefit you and assist you throughout the next steps of the process. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining this evening, and I hope that you have a wonderful night.